Hi friends, it's Miracle, and today, in the spirit of Nonfiction November, and also to celebrate I finally got my voice back, which is very relatable in my head, I want to talk about some nonfictions that I read and I feel like are very thought-provoking and I enjoyed to recommend to you guys, and hopefully you can find something that you are interested in too. And because a lot of the nonfictions that I read are memoirs, in this video I will specifically talk about the nonfictions that are not memoirs, because if I start to talk about memoirs, there will be no space for other books. So later in the future, I will make another videos talking only about memoirs. So today, without further ado, let's start to talk about the nonfictions that I loved that are not memoirs. So I have a book that I cannot recommend more, especially under the current world circumstances, and that is Our Bodies, Their Battlefield by Christina Lamb. And the subtitle of this book is War Through the Lives of Women. During the 25 years of Christina Lamb's career as a war correspondent, she noticed that women are rarely interviewed about their experiences during wartime. So she determined to uncover the untold story of women that results in this book. This book, she investigated different cases of women's life during wartime from past to present to shed light on the underreported stories of women and exposed the brutality against women during wartime. While men are usually the fighters on the main stage of war, women are usually being objectified, tortured, and even assaulted on another inhuman level. And moreover, the violence against women are rarely being recorded, not to mention justified. This book truly opened my eyes, and it is the book that I think about the most from last February. And with the new war broken out in the Middle East, I feel like it is a crucial time for us to revisit the topic of this book. I remember when reading this book, I really appreciated how it discussed the violence against women, especially the sexual violence against women, are actually not about sexual reasons at all during wartime. It's more about the power dynamic between the soldiers and the cruelty of war itself. So if you haven't read this book yet, I highly recommend it. I feel like it's a book that is very important for us to read, but be prepared because the cases in this book can be very disturbing. Moving on, I have two books about mental health, and they both challenge the way that we look at mental health. The first one is Stranger to Ourselves, The Unsettled Minds and the Stories by Rachel Aviv. This is a collection of essays and case studies about individuals whose stories challenged our conventional psychiatric limits and reshape how we understanding mental health. It started with the story of the author who has been diagnosed with anorexia at the age of 6 without even understanding the common causes of anorexia, not to mention applying it to herself. From there, she introduced different stories of people and discussed them, including two that I really loved. The first one is an Indian woman who was treated as mentally ill in Western countries, but she actually was treated as a saint in her own culture. And the other one is a person who has depression, but instead of reshaping herself into the box of the acceptable norm in the society, she decided to challenge this concept. This book is written in the sense of compassion and understanding, and that really makes it easy for us to connect with the people that it's talking about. And I also love the social commentary that is always placed in the right place at the right time. And finally, I just love the question that this book brought up. How did the questions that we construct about mental illness influence our understanding of others and their experiences? The other book about mental health is the one that I just finished, is Hidden Valley Road, Inside the Mind of an American Family by Robert Kolker. This book has been around and loved by so many people that I'm really glad that I finally read it. And it is talking about the Galvin families with 12 children. 6 of the 12 children are suffering from schizophrenia, and for the longest time, the Galvin family doesn't know the cause nor have a solution to the suffering. Eventually, they became one of the first families that are studied by the National Institution of Mental Health in America. The book talks partly about the story of the Galvin family and partly about the scientists who are working on studying schizophrenia and making efforts to push forward the study. The family stories are very captivating, and it seems like they have endless layers behind their mental health history and their family dynamics. dynamic for you to discover. And at the same time, it's very interesting and sometimes even nerve-wracking to read about the development of the medical industry, especially when scientists wanted to study a subject that is not as profitable but very important. And you can also see there are different attitudes towards mental health among the different family members in the Galvin family. And I also like a question that this book asks, which is whether the treatment that the Galvin family got are really helping them or just suppress their real needs. So overall, a very fascinating book and I highly recommend. Talking about medical industry, I also loved Empire of Pain, The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty by Patrick Radden Keefe. If the Hidden Valley Road is the one case where the medical industry is driven by financial profit, this book is a deep dive into the whole industry, from talking about the opioid crisis in America and also talking about the story of the Sackler family, who are called the most evil family in America because they almost single-handedly created the opioid epidemic and also the drug addiction problems. This book follows the Sackler family from before they made a fortune and showed you how quickly they turned into a money-making machine after they discovered that the medicine that they found is addictive. They chase money and fame and falsely promoting painkillers to everybody just to get more people to use it, not once they have their patient's health on mind. I like that instead of only talking about the Sackler family, this book also delved into the whole industry and talking about how the whole pharmaceutical industry was driven by capitalism and without thinking about patients. I also loved the discussion about how addiction is the systematic problem that are applied on people by the industry or the society, providing us a new angle when talking about addictions. Here I have another book that involving the medical industry for a little bit, which is also a very interesting part of history. The book is called The RADIUM Girls, The Dark Story About America's Shining Girls by Kate Moore. Kate Moore's other book, The Woman That Cannot Be Silenced, is one of my priorities for this month, which is because I love the radium girls a lot. The book is talking about when radium was firstly discovered as a new element, it was promoted as the face of the new beauty and the wonder drugs in the medical community, so people started to use it left and right without knowing the harm of it. Some of the examples where people were using radium including body lotion, fashions, and even consumables, and the workers who are applying radiums onto everything, including a bunch of young women in factories. These women are called the Shining Girls, and they felt extremely lucky to work with this fabulous new element until they felt mysteriously ill. But of course, their illness were ignored by the factories, and they found them in a poisonous scandal where they have to battle for their Medicare. I like this book for both of the subject matter and also the storytelling. I feel like the writing is very compelling and led the way into this piece of forgotten history very smoothly. And it also showed you how women were trained by society at that time, and it's so difficult for women to be seen, whether healthy or ill, in many aspects of life. Next, I have a book that I read and liked a lot last year and even inspired me of going to visit one of the places mentioned in this book. The book is How War Is Past, A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America by Clint Smith. In this book, the author visited numerous of landmarks and places that related to the history of slavery in America. Some of them are a trip away, but some of them are just hidden in the plain sight in our day-to-day life. Along the way, the author talks to different people, including tour guides, residents near the places, and tourists that he met, to talk about how different people think about enslavement and the history right now. In part, this is a memoir, but I also feel like this is more on the nonfiction historical side, so that's why I include the book in this video, not the memoir one. As a person who moved to the States after I became an adult, when I was little, the history of slavery was always very distant to me. It was another thing that happened to another country across the planet. It was until I moved here I started to gradually learn about the history of slavery and think and reflect on it more, but it was always told to me from a historical point of view. So I really loved that this book showed us how much of the history is still relevant to today, and in order to move forward collectively, we need to confront and face the history instead of like twisting and hiding it like some states do. I went to the African Burial Ground National Monument in New York City when I was visiting there. Well, I learned so much in that museum. I cannot help but noticing there were only 3 visitors at the time, the whole afternoon when I was there. It was me and another black couple. This makes me a little bit sad and also makes me want to recommend this book to more people. Moving on from American history, let's talking about some less heavy things worldwide, I guess. The next book I want to recommend is the address book, What Street Addresses Reveal About Identity, Race, Wealth and Power by Deirdre Mask. This is a very interesting book talking about something that we usually don't think too much into if we're not learning like urban plannings or such. It discusses the history of addresses all over the world from now for some reason very trendy, like on social media, the Roman Empire to the modern world across the planet. It's just very interesting for me to read about how addresses are not only there for you to find ways, but more importantly, it is actually for people to find you, and how addresses can shape our views to the culture and history. Overall, I think this is a very fun and interesting book about addresses, and I want to recommend it to people who wants to read the stories that you didn't know that you would like and have a relaxing time. Next, I have a book that impacted me personally so much last year, and it is What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex by Angela Chen. And this is a book apparently talking about asexuality. Asexuality is a very, very complicated topic to talk about, both because of it's underrepresented, so people have a lot of questions towards it, and also its nature of its wide spectrum. So I liked how this book dissected the very complicated topic into very digestible parts and discussed each part thoroughly with a lot of interviews and stories. And speaking of stories, I also liked how diverse of an interviewee that the author presented in this book, because I feel like it's already important for us to read about people's stories from all different backgrounds and identities to understand such a complex subject. Like so many people who love this book, I connected with it on a personal level. I feel like this book explained so many of my confusions and questions growing up and provide me a new interpretation of the world, and more importantly, it makes me feel so normal, seen, and comfortable. I'm really glad that I read it. So despite I think that some chapters can be rearranged in this book, I still feel like it's a masterpiece about the topic of asexuality, especially if you are not familiar with this concept, and I just want everyone to read it. Lastly, I have 2 books about politics, like how could I not, right? So the first one is How to Lose a Country, The 7 Steps from Democracy to Dictatorship by East Timokran. When I read this book last year, I said that this book is warning us how nationalism is coming back to us globally faster than we expected and stronger than before. And with the situation in the development worldwide since I have read this book, I feel like the world has become crazier and crazier, which is already important for us to read this book and read this book now. So in this book, the author talks about how Turkey as a country fall into dictatorship from democracy gradually, and compares the similarities between Turkey back then to a lot of Western countries now. And she also examined and analyzed the role of people and how people played a part in the shifting of responsibilities in current stage. And by studying different events around the world, the author discussed why the concept of real people are actually created by propaganda, and how and why it will be so difficult to debunk this concept. I remember one of my takeaways in this book is for people who have similar opinions to work together towards common goals, instead of spending our precious time and energy to talk to people who's holding different opinions. This may sound controversial, and I fully recognize the value and the importance of hearing different opinions and try to understand where they come from. But if you think about it, in this easily distracted age, we actually don't have a lot of energy if we get distracted too much. So with that being said, developing agreeable plans to move forward toward a common goal, despite some like minor differences on opinions, is actually crucially important in this day and age. And talking about taking actions, the last book on this list is Politics is for Power: How to Move Beyond Political Hobbyism, Take Actions, and Make Changes by Eden D. Hirsch. In this book, the author heavily criticized a group of people that he called political hobbyists. And by that, he means the people who like to keep up to date with politics and to follow the news intensively and post online about their outrages, which sometimes can cause harm and only reward the politicians who caters to those needs. The author suggested instead of doing that, what people really need to do is to go into communities and organizations to really do small and minor things, and that is actually where the grassroots powers became really powerful. This book is very difficult for me to read because obviously I fit into the description of political hobbyist like almost perfectly, but it's also why I want to read it ever since I listened to an interview of the author talking about this concept, because I really want to learn more about what more can I do to make changes and do actionable things instead of like only, express my opinions verbally. But at the same time, of course, I have different opinion with this author. I feel like a lot of the actions that he suggested actually came from a place with privilege because they either require a large amount of money, time, or energy, which is not very easy to get for day-to-day busy people. But nonetheless, I still recommend this book because I think it's very thought-provoking, and I do agree on the sense that we should do more besides purely like being informed about everything that's going on. And that is also the thing that I'm always remind myself and working towards too. This is one of the books that you don't need to agree with it in order to read or recommend it. So in general, I just feel like maybe check it out if you have the chance. And that's all the books that I want to recommend in this video. I hope some of them piques your interest. And please let me know if you have any books that you recommend me to check out and what have you read recently. And of course, don't forget to say hi in the comment section down below. I hope you happy reading, stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you in my next bookish video. Bye!